Okay, thank you. The light and pictures of Windley, and very, very interesting choice there, and I'm not sure who to thank for this, but I'm sure that you all enjoy. Intellectuals ought to study the past, not for the pleasure they find in doing so, but to derive lessons from it, or, if necessary, to desert those lessons in full knowledge of the facts. Only a real knowledge of the past can keep in one's consciousness the feeling of historical continuity essential to the consolidation of a multinational state. The words of Windley as he began his presentation at the 21st Caribbean Studies Association annual conference, quoting Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop. And I felt these words were very appropriate as we get ready to listen to our speaker and take in some of the lessons of the political history of the Caribbean as we, as the future leaders of tomorrow, try to grapple with the issues of today. To introduce our guest speaker, I call again Dr. George Shalmine to introduce Mr. George Shalmine to introduce our guest speaker.
Good evening again. I see some people just walking in, including my friend whom I'd like to recognize his presence, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Mr. Sylvester Closet. Thanks very much for coming. Lest I be called a nurse, I quickly corrected the gentleman with the doctor thing. I'm not a doctor, I'm George Shalmine. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me distinct pleasure to fraternally present to you and welcome Damian Greaves, as he likes to be called, as the doctorate was only conferred, I think if I'm correct, in 2013, and so it's taken a little while to, sink in that he's Dr. Damian Greaves. But the man that I know is not a man of titles. He is a man, very much a man of the people who I've been acquainted with for more or less about 30 years, I would presume. I remember when I picked him up from the airport on Thursday, he reminded me that he used to have some discourse with three guys he called the Three Musketeers, which were Armstrong Alexis, Will Louis, and yours truly. And we were always engaging each other in all kinds of debate, particularly political debate, on which he is going to talk tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look in your program, which I will try to use as my focus on introducing the guest speaker, you will see a short biography prepared by me on the person who is about to address you tonight. I will try to, as they say, to bring out a little more than what's on the paper. So please bear with me as I try to describe the person who is going to lecture you this evening. Mr. Damian Eisenhower Greaves is some Papa may say they quite guy from a book, so if I have one now, Eisenhower. So Mr. Damian Eisenhower Greaves is a St. Lucian son of the soil who hails from the Dennery community. And I say Dennery community because most people know him for his two-term representation of the Dennery South constituency. But actually, in growing up, Damien spent quite a bit of time in Dennery North. And so, therefore, he is a member of the Dennery community at large. But the only problem with that was going up for Dennery North, but that's another show. So we keep moving on. So he is a former two-term representative of the Dennery South constituency from 1997 to 2001 and 2001 to 2006, and former Minister of Health and Community Development, Cooperatives, Culture, and Local Development. And I left out Bacchanal. Using Davian words, he was the Minister of Bacchanal. But that's again for another show. Apart from his foray into politics, Dr. Greaves is a lifelong pedagogue, big word for those who don't know, meaning teacher, who is currently an associate professor lecturing in sociology and political science at the University of St. George's in Grenada, having been there from 2007. Dr. Greaves holds a doctorate of philosophy in health services / health management and policy from the University of Minnesota. He also has a Master of Science in Public Health from the University of the West Indies, a Master of Science in Sociology, and a Bachelor of Arts BA Honors in History and Sociology with Education from the University of the West Indies. It's only after I spoke to him and he sent me his bio, I realized that Damien is close to being a thermometer. The amount of degrees that I see. He also proudly states that he has a certificate in teacher education and educational administration from the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College, which at that time was simply known as the St.Lucia Teachers College. Dr. Greaves has lectured at the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College and the University of the West Indies School of Continuing Education, St. Lucia. He has worked on a number of projects, including the Mabia Valley Development Project. He has consulted on the National Health Sector Policy in St. Lucia and done assessments on the closure of George F.L. Charles Airport for St. Lucia Air and Seaports Authority, and also on climate change in Barbados. He's published a number of articles in various journals, including the Journal of Eastern Caribbean Studies on the subject of constitutional reform in St. Lucia. Dr. Greaves is no stranger to the lecture circuit, having lectured in various Caribbean countries. The firebrand, energetic, and Socratic approach, I did that last word Socratic for you to find out at the course of the lecture, for those who don't know, of Dr. Greaves, to lecture presentation should excite you and stimulate all of you, and I do hope that you enjoy the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What's Waterpoon? George Charlemagne forgot to say that I was born in Labrie. I think that was deliberate. Right. Yes, of course I was born in Labrie, La Pointe. C'est La Pointe? Oui, La Pointe. La Croix. Right. Absolutely. My grandmother showed me the little thing there right under a Pierre Coco. Right. So she showed that to me, so I was born in Labrie and I need people to know that. I want to thank you very much. In fact, let me recognize everybody, especially the young people. Protocol hasn't been established before. And I want to thank you very much. I want to thank all of the young people for being here because this is really your show. I was saying to my good friend Ignatius Jean and his wife, Anne Gregor, some time ago, that really it's really important that we incorporate the young people. It's so important that they take over because my mission now is really to ignite young minds. Young minds need to be ignited across the region to take up the positions that are necessary for the future. And I often say it's a misnomer to suggest that the youth are the leaders of tomorrow. I have come to understand that the youth are the leaders of today. It has to be today because they're the ones in charge. They're the ones who need the nurturing and the assistance from people like me who have more years behind me than ahead of me. So we need to begin to look at that. So I want to say, so I am on the path of recruiting soldiers for the political army of the Caribbean. It's important that we do that now. Why is it important? Simply because we have come to what can be suggested as the crossroads in terms of leadership. Not only political leadership, which I'm going to touch on tonight, but also leadership in our communities, in our clubs and associations, in our various institutions. There is what you call now a dearth of leadership. We have to understand, therefore, the complexities that we have to deal with of the society now. The transition of our society from one particular epoch or era to another. Why have I chosen political leadership in consultation with Mr. George Charlemagne and the Wayne Louis Foundation? Because I think it's important. Because I think it has been left to chance. Because I think people believe that there is some kind of automaticity with the development of leadership. And we have not consciously and deliberately tried to nurture leadership, tried to nurse leadership, tried to develop leadership. We believe that leadership or political leadership is simply a situation where there is some spontaneity on the conference floor of a particular political party. I think that we need now to ensure that young people are brought on board not in terms of token participation and jumping up to music and being part of the campaign of the political party, but young people must be involved. They must be taught. They must be nurtured. They must understand the history, even the history of the political party. Too many of us are coming into the politics of the region, whether it is Trinidad and Tobago or Jamaica or any other country, including our own country, St.Lucia. We come into a particular political institution or political party, not having a sense of the history, not having a sense of the importance of that history, so that we can, in fact, be better leaders. I like to walk around, you know. Can I walk around? You know, I'm often shocked. By the way our young people do not have a sense of history of our region. If you ask young people, or many, not so young people, about what has transpired, what has transpired in our Caribbean, I think you'll get the shock of your life. At St. George's University, where I have the good fortune to be lecturing, young people of Grenada do not even know about the Grenada Revolution. And whether people think that the Grenada Revolution was good or bad, that is besides the point. Because we must learn. I always say to my students, success does not come without failure. In fact, it is good to be successful by having been a failure before. And as I was discussing with my good comrade Jer and his wife, too many times when people fail, we reject them. We should be rewarding failure. Now people say it sounds a little bit oxymoronic or a little bit out of whack to be saying we must reward failure, but how else will people succeed? So a common entrance exam should not label or stigmatize an individual as a failure because you failed the common entrance exam once. In our Caribbean territories, there is too much of an emphasis on rejecting people because they may have failed once or twice. We never know what that individual can produce. And so, I want the young people to know that really this is your show, and I want to ensure that you're part of it. Can I get there? Thank you. So we're talking about the socio-historical perspective on leadership in the Caribbean, and I must tell you that Mr. George Charlemagne touched a very important point. I don't believe in lecturing. I believe in discussion and interaction. So I'll be asking you questions tonight. You will be asking me questions. We are going to arrive at the conclusion tonight together so we can understand exactly what is going on in our region. He's talking about the Socratic approach. I talk about the Socratic approach because I believe in discussion. I believe that I am not coming with all of the answers. I believe that we must discuss it, we must analyze and arrive at the answers. I believe that there are no right or wrong answers. Again, people will challenge me on that. I know my good friend Mr. Closer will challenge me on that. There are no right or wrong answers because there are several interpretations that one can arrive at for several different phenomena. And therefore, we must be able to come together and speak together and arrive at a certain conclusion. That's why we have different theories. And so I do not like to lecture. I like to discuss. I like us to arrive at a certain interpretation. Because as I say to people, I am not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. I am not the sage on the stage. I am simply the guide on the side. I am coming to facilitate, not to give answers. We will shape the answers together. So we're talking about the socio-historical situation. And the first question I would like to ask, can anybody tell me what is leadership? Mr. Charlemagne, do I have your permission to approach my lecture in this manner, sir? Thank you. What is leadership? Let's talk about that. From our young people, from our young West Indian, our young Caribbean minds, what to you comes out as leadership? Hi, Gabe, good night. What is leadership? Anybody?
The ability to influence others.
The ability to influence others. Anybody else? I like that. The ability to influence others. The next question we can ask is, how does one influence an individual? The ability to influence others. Anyone else? Anybody else? On this side of the house? Leadership. You know, I'm doing this deliberately. You know why I'm doing this? I spoke to Mr. Charlemagne about it. Because too many of us do not like to speak out and say what we think and how we feel. We are not supposed to be sitting and just taking in information. We have to be able to be part of the conversation and to make a contribution. Anybody shy to speak here? Is anybody shy to speak? This is our forum. Don't be shy. So can I get one more point on leadership? The ability to influence others. Not dictate to others. Not dominate others. The ability to inspire. So to influence, to inspire. Anything else? This side of the house is a little silent, but I see beautiful smiles nonetheless. So can I get your input? Anybody here? Anybody? Anybody? Can I get something here on this side of the house? What about you, young man? What do you think leadership is? Don't be afraid. What's leadership? What do you think it is? What comes to mind? Okay, give me a good example of it. Sorry? Being with others. Yes. Also being with others. And I want to take that a little more, a little to the distance and say not only being with others, but also being able to associate with others to arrive at a particular answer or solution to a particular challenge or problem. Is this working? That batteries? Okay, so the outline of our discussion, not the lecture, the outline of our discussion is for political leadership. We understand that leadership, that we have difficulty with leadership in various situations. But I want to focus on political leadership, the nature of political leadership. And the reason why I want to focus it is on this year is the year of political leadership in the Caribbean. How many elections are we going to have this year? We have had 2 this year. Which 2? Let me see if the young people are involved in the politics of the region. Which elections have we had this year in the Caribbean? St. Kitts, beautiful. Who is the Prime Minister of St. Kitts? Your Who is the new Prime Minister of St. Kitts? Dr. Timothy Harris. Who was the former Prime Minister? What's the other election we had in the Caribbean? And who won? And there was another election in the Caribbean. Antigua. That was last year, late last year. Who won? Was that a new political party came to the fore, right? Very good. What elections are due to take place this year? Guyana, very good. Oh man. And who again? Close to Guyana? Trinidad, and also Suriname. Suriname in May, Guyana in May, Trinidad and Tobago, the election must be constitutionally held before September this year. Right. So these are the things that we need to look at. And any other election coming up this year? Beyond the Caribbean? England. When is that? In May as well. Very good. Very good. So, we're moving. So, the nature of political leadership I want to look at in the pre-independence era. We want to look at the nature of political leadership in the post-independence era, the current socio-political environment, and I asked the question, whether political leadership in the Caribbean at this current stage? Yes, talk to me, sir. So the nature of political leadership in the pre-independence era, we're talking about post-emancipation. Now what we want to focus on here, I don't want to go into crown colony government, neither do I want to go into all of the other kinds of forms that came immediately after emancipation. What I want to focus on is really, what was the environment then? Yes, anti-colonial struggles. The environment was one whereby the fight was against poverty. Emancipation had ended. 100 years after emancipation, that is 1838, 1st of August 1838, well, 1834 people talk about the apprenticeship system, and then we come into 1838. 100 years, about 100 years after the emancipation system, we had the labor struggles. We had what you call the Depression. We had what you call the 1930s riots, out of which came the Moyen Commission that made certain recommendations about what would happen in the countries. But accompanying that were the labor riots and labor unrest, poverty, unhealthy and unsanitary conditions, poor education, poor housing. The leaders at that time presided over a situation where they had to deal with the basic situations in the society. Poverty, unhealthy conditions, thatch, roof houses. People began to get their little plywood houses and so on. And things began to improve. You did not go to the river anymore to get water. Now you had your standpipes and then you got into your portable pipe-borne water. So these were basic things that they presided over, and it was good at the time. Proper wages, proper conditions of work. So there emerged your trade unions, looking not only from the point of view of poverty and so on, but the call for equality, the call for equity, justice for all. These were the issues that political leaders at the time had to preside over. And it was well expressed by Riviere, a Dominican writer called Emmanuel Bill Riviere, who said it was a call against the economic exploitation, material poverty, political impotence, and cultural nakedness. That is where we talk about the anti-colonial struggles coming into the period of independence. Looking for equality. Looking at the economic exploitation of the countries at that time, where we were merely producing for the mother country at that time, whether it was England or France, across the region. So that's what we were looking at. But we were looking also at the political impotence. Next slide. And what came out of this? We have our decolonization period with early independence, and even before, who is this? Michael Manley. Who was his father? Norman Manley. So I couldn't find for Norman Manley, but Norman Manley, of course, would have preceded Michael Manley. Who is this? Eric Gairy of Grenada. And Eric Gairy himself was a revolutionary. He came into the trade union movement. He formed his trade union. He formed his political party called GULP, Grenada United Labour Party. He struggled for improved wages, land to the landless. Those were the clarion calls across the region by people like Eric Matthew Gairy, people like Norman Manley. I have George Odlum here because I thought at that time, in the pre-independence move, there was a call for the whole business of nationalism and so on. So we have to look at that. So John Compton would have been part of the trade union movement, fighting for certain things as well in terms of poverty, poor housing, poor health, poor sanitation, and moving in a certain direction. Next slide, please. But then, our political leadership, we are saying, came essentially from the emerging middle class. That's where it really came. And one of our difficulties we will see on hindsight is that that class, and who are these prime ministers? Barrow, Errol Walton Barrow, the father of independence of Barbados. Forbes Burnham of Guyana. You will know by the shades anywhere. Fairburg Sr. Now you see, a lot of our people, a lot of our young, do you know these people? That's the history that we have to continue to teach, so that people can understand where the struggles came from. So my essential argument, and you may not agree with me, but my essential argument was that the political leadership came essentially from the emerging middle class. They were the educated ones, who empathized with the lower class in terms of the lack of education, the poverty, the destitution, and so on. But history will record that they did not represent a revolutionary force in search of structural reorientation to what obtained them. They were essentially reformists. They wanted to just tinker the system. Just make sure a little bit is good there, a little bit is good there, take away the poverty, improve housing, improve education. But they did not go for the entire revolutionizing of the structure of the society at the time. They kept a lot of what was there before. So it can best be described as reformist and ambivalent. We're not going too far. And yes. And we see this coming from C.L.R. James, a much underrated scholar and writer in the Caribbean that I am now actually doing projects on with my students in Grenada, because I think it's so important for us to go back to these people like C.L.R. James and Sir Arthur Lewis, for us to really understand where they were coming from at the time, so we can move forward. And this is what C.L.R. James said in one of his, to my mind, best works, The Black Jacobins. Long before actual independence, large numbers of the middle classes, including their politicians, wanted independence put off as far into the distance as possible. So, ambivalent, reformist, not revolutionary. On our own Tennyson James will come pretty soon, where you see he complements what C.L.R. James said in a lecture, I think in a lecture was it in Lavry or Swazel, on the 36th independence anniversary, looking at that same theme. So for C.L.R. James, West Indian leaders were not only backward, but focused more on seeking their own material gain rather than the true independence of the masses. Sounds familiar? Sounds familiar? Yeah. And has anything changed? We have to be brutally frank and honest tonight. Brutally frank and honest. They derailed, back one step, please. They derailed the process of real independence since the full transformation of society had not been pursued. So it was poverty, it was housing. They did a good job in terms of low wages. What we are saying is that at the time they did not take the opportunity to realize or to project a radical transformation of the society. And we are reeling from that today. Next slide, please. And then we come to St. Lucia's own journey of independence as a nation. And this point is both echoed and expanded by our very own Dr. Tennyson Joseph. And I quote, one of our greatest weaknesses was the failure of our nationalist and anti-colonial movement to make more fundamental demands for internal change and economic development. That was from his lecture, public lecture on the occasion of the 36th year of St. Lucia's independence. So this is that's the point we arrived at. What did we have at the time? An agrarian society, based mainly on estate work and the peasantry, that lived in conditions of squalor. So some of us do not have a full appreciation of where we have come from. We have made some progress. Let us be honest about it. Yes, we have made some progress. Yes, we have come from a situation of near destitution and poverty to a position where people can have their cell phones now. But what awaits us is the next question. So, here's the point where we can have a discussion. Different times, do we have different times with the same message? Do we still have poverty? Yes. Is there still some amount of destitution? Yes. Are we still dealing with housing issues? Yes. Are we still dealing with education issues? Yes. Are we still dealing with health issues? Yes. We are still dealing with those issues. But to know we are dealing with those issues in a more complex society. A more complex society where people are moving from collectivity to individuality. Where the ethos or the ethic moves from that of collectivity to individuality. And the technology promotes the shift from collectivity to individuality. My cell phone, my iPhone, my laptop. At one time you had the telephone, it was the community, household telephone. Wasn't that so? Yeah. Now we don't have any phone in the house, or if it's there for decorative purposes, generally. So, everything has changed in terms of the collective to the individual. So these days, when you answer the phone, when you used to answer the phone, you used to answer politely, good morning or good afternoon. This is the Gray's residence, or the Jean's residence, or the Louise residence. These days we don't do that. What do we do now? The cell phone comes and we have the call and say, where you? Where you at? And sometimes you say, Sometimes you say, well, I'm in grocery, but the camera on you and you're in library.
And we are losing the art of conversation.
Absolutely. We are losing the art of conversation. We are also using the art of connection. So now we think that we can hide behind Facebook and Twitter and other forms of the social media. And what we are actually cultivating is a cult of superficiality. So we say, hello, how are you doing behind Facebook? How are you doing, boy? But is that really what you're doing? Is that really what you say? Do you really care? Shakespeare said the eyes are the window to the soul. I want face to face so I can see the body language. And I can see the eyes. And I can tell the eyes, as he said, as Lorenzo said to Jessica in Merchant of Venice, thy eyes reveal speechless messages. That's what we're talking about. So when the young man speaks to the young lady can discern whether he's being a little bit economical with the truth. That's what we need now. So people hiding behind these fancy screens, whatever shape they may be, we are losing out. Is there any wonder why we have a spate of suicides? It's the lack of connection. People do not feel connected. Because what measures you now, what gives you value, or what gives you value, is your material possessions. Precisely. That's what gives you value now. We are living in a society, and it's not peculiar to St. Lucia. It's all over. What gives you value is the shoes, the brand of shoes that you wear, the brand of clothing that you wear, the cell phone that you carry. If you have a BlackBerry these days, you're obsolete. You must have an iPhone. And that consumerism is eating away at the very fabric of the society, and our young people and middle-aged people are getting caught. You have what you call a values lag. That is the complexity that has to be presided over. Such that the institutional means that you expect to give you what you want is not there, and sometimes we have to step out of those institutional means to provide for ourselves. Because what gives us value is not your politeness, it's not your desire to wait, it's not your desire to work hard, but your material possessions. And so, this is what our Caribbean leaders now have to preside over. So, different times, I say same message in a more complex environment. Do the underlying issues and challenges remain the same? Absolutely. We just spoke about that. Are the masses still alienated? They may be alienated even more now. Because decision making across the Caribbean, let's be brutally frank and honest. Right now, everybody thinks democracy is simply majority rules. So I win the election today, so now I can make a decision. Friends, democracy is not majority rules. Democracy is consensus. That's what it is. It's supposed to be consensus. So if I win an election, whether 15 not or 12-5 or whatever, I am supposed to be involved in consensus and get the information from the people. So you do not tell me I'm going to build a bridge there tomorrow, and you do not get the community wisdom and the involvement of the people so that you could know how to proceed. C.L.R. James said it. Too many of our leaders believe that the masses of the people are ignorant and they will not be able to understand what we want to put to them. The day and age is different now. When Sir John and Weber Sr. and others came to speak to people and give them information, they were a cut above the rest in terms of education. The leaders now cannot consider themselves to be a cut above the rest in terms of education. You tell me something, I Google you. I Google you, and I can tell if you are in fact frugal with the truth and liberal with deception. That's what we have to be looking at now. And that is what we preside over. And those of us who are aspiring to leadership in whatever field of life, in particular, political leadership, we have to understand the environment in which we are now. And the word is preparation. The word is preparation. You do not simply walk around the constituency, see somebody looking very popular, and say, yeah man, this guy's popular, let's go with that. That's not how we're supposed to do business. Let us now begin to be serious about nurturing leadership talents. We cannot leave it to chance. We cannot. This environment and these times are too serious to take leadership for granted and believe that there's some automatic way in which leadership will develop. Next slide, please. So, the question is, are people's needs in the region still treated with disdain and disregard? Are we still taking people for granted? You know our Prime Minister's here. Who is this? You got a deadline? Yes. So are people's needs in the region still treated with disdain and disregard? Yes. Do we still think that we can just do anything and the people will understand and the people will believe and the people will accept? I think we need to begin to move away from that. Are people involved in the developmental process? No. If we say yes, then I can agree with you. But the question is how? Is it just tokenism? I come to a town hall meeting. I have already decided that I have planned to put this drain there. And I said, listen, so the engineers have done this here, and they have done that, and the drain is there. So is everybody's okay? Yes, okay. Bye-bye. Drain comes in. You did not get the community wisdom, and the drain fails. We need to now begin to look at the community wisdom and involve people. I'm talking about real involvement. Leadership in this complex environment requires involvement. So when I teach my medical students the sociology of medicine, I say to them the phenomenon, and I'm sure Dr. Stanley will agree with me. The phenomenon of medicine now is that people go on Google to self-diagnose, to find out what is wrong with them. And then they just go to the doctor to ask for the doctor's advice on the way forward. Woe betide you if they discover something that you have not had the good fortune to discover. You shall lose your clientele because they will say you don't know what you're about. Because they go, and that is the whole business of information now. This information has empowered people. I've been saying to my comrade, because Comrade Jean and I speak very, very often, I've said to him, this has become such a borderless world. Information has made it, access to information at your fingertips has made it a borderless world. Canada no has service. Russia no has service. That's to show you the power of information. That makes the world so much more complex. The migration, people moving from one place to the next, makes the world so much more complex. It is not like the pre-independence agrarian period that we are talking about in this new industrial period. And is patronage politics still alive and well in the region? Is that still alive and well in the region? It has not gone to sleep yet. But we must provide it with more than an anesthetic to send it to sleep. It must not be temporary. I believe we need to get this business a little better. Let's move on. So, we come to the point now. Our current socio-political environment is one that really looks at what you call the phenomenon of globalization and neoliberal ideology. I say that these two are twins. It's a twin. They go hand in hand. They have grown together. They have taken over the world together. Neoliberal ideology has always now accompanied this phenomenon of globalization. The question is, what have been the consequences of these ideas and policies? That's what I would like to discuss with you after Mr. Shalman gives me a little water. I do not think we need to explain what globalization is. The one thing I want people to understand is that globalization didn't start 10 years ago or 15 years ago. No, that's all right. Globalization didn't start 10 or 15 years ago. You know. Globalization started a long time ago, even before Columbus made his voyages. What we are seeing now is a maturity of globalization, not the beginning of globalization. I keep saying that to people. We are seeing a maturity, and the maturity is taking place with this neoliberal ideology. And what does that mean? The whole idea of the market ruling, the invisible hand of the market. That's the fundamental thing these days. Everything is reduced to the market. And what does that do to us? It tells us all of those people who are engaged in that thought process, that ideology, are telling you that the state should no longer be involved in redistribution. How could the state not be involved in redistribution when the market is failing thousands of people, millions of people across the globe? How could the state not be involved? It is the state that has helped us to reach where we are today. So how do you want to roll back the importance of the state and roll back the importance? Roll back the importance of the state. How could you roll back the importance of the state now? You can't. Because the state has its role to play. One of the things I always say is that capitalism has no distributive morality. Now we're talking about inclusive capitalism. You have heard that, George? Now, all of our Bretton Woods institutions, whether it is the IMF or the World Bank, they're talking about inclusive capitalism. Where, quote here, inclusive capital. What? Capitalism inclusive? The best thing that has happened to capitalism is that it has been exclusive. So it's a misnomer, from my humble point of view, to talk about inclusive capitalism. So what has to happen? The leadership, our political leaders, our state must engage, must have the political will to engage the state in terms of the redistribution, so that people can get a chance to survive, so that people can be given at least a civilizing minimum in the society to help them to survive. So, when we talk about globalization, the neoliberal situation, we have to talk about Margaret Thatcher and Mr. Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, and at the time, the Prime Minister of England. And we know what happened at that time with them. That is when the era of the neoliberal thinking came back to the fore and came back very strongly. Why? So what we are seeing, a wide-ranging shift in prevalent ideas and social relationships. Wide-ranging shift in terms of the prevalent ideas and social relationships. We talk about the connection. The connection is no longer there. More intense market competition, less state intervention. I just explained that. That is what is happening to us right now. This is what we have to preside over. Next slide. This is what we have to preside over. And then we talk about the entrepreneurial or the commercial orientation to action. So everything now must be reduced to the market. So health must be reduced to the market. We must privatize health. We must privatize education. We must privatize everything. And that's where we talk about the new invisible hand. Because the whole business now is that market ideologies that have climaxed into market fundamentalism, meaning that you have a resurgent faith in the power of the market to secure efficient outcomes. My argument is that the market cannot secure efficient outcomes. The state must do that. Should our political leadership, therefore, bow to the pressures of the neoliberal ideology, bow to the pressures of globalization, and say that we are no longer going to try to redistribute to take care of the vast majority of our people? That is the question I want to leave you with. So what is the human condition? As we examine the challenges and the impact of globalization and the neoliberal ideology, the question is, what is the human condition? Who is this lady? Margaret Thatcher. And and you see what we put there. Hell is now being privatized. Even hell being privatized now. Can you imagine that? So, the human condition deinstitutionalized, individualized, privatized. That's where we're drifting now. So, you want to know why our clubs are not working anymore? And what we say is that, the leadership, something is wrong with the leadership, the young people are not interested in that anymore. There is a pervading environment or atmosphere of everything being reduced to the individual. Not who's a PS club, who fait more about cricketer. Not who's a PS club, who fait more about footballer. I don't need any credit union to do this and that. It's now reduced to me. That is what is happening. I don't need a trade union anymore to fight for wages and so on. I can stay at my home. If they fight, I get it. But I don't have to be involved. It now comes to me, Georgie. It's now me. It's individualized. It's privatized. Move on, please. So what is the perception of public affairs, folks? Privatize all the things. That's what people are talking about now. That is where the thing seems to be drifting. So you shift from the sphere of management, of groups, of communities, of organizations like your trade unions and so on, to the sphere of the individual life politics. Is there any wonder why people ask, but what has the government done for me? Is there any wonder why the individual in the community said, qui ça m'y a fait bon moi depuis entre un pouvoir? It all comes down to what is in it for me. It all comes down to self-interest. What is in it for me? So there's a shift away, as we said, from the social to the individual responsibility. That is the environment in which we live now. How does the political leadership preside over that kind of environment that we have now? So the ideas have worked their way into government policies. We said privatize health, privatize education. It will work better. But I want to make a very, very important and significant statement tonight. Are we convinced that when we privatize it will work better? Some of the private entities are worse than the government in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So why do you think if you take it out of the hands of the state and you put it in the hands of a private sector, that it will be more efficient, that it will work better? So you're talking about operations of organizations, the lives of ordinary citizens. So this is what you call the age of austerity. I believe the best time for austerity is when we are experiencing prosperity. The best time for austerity is not when people are already grumbling. Not grumbling, sorry, when people are already suffering. I really believe we need to get this right. But a lot of us throughout the Caribbean are following the prescriptions of the IMF and so on, and we're compromising our sovereignty. So they're telling us tighten our belts. We have to tighten our belts. Landing moon. Some not tell us say way. You pass us say way encore. Chilopla say way. So it's like telling somebody walk from Labrie to Dennery, and that's okay, that's alright. But if you tell me walk from Labrie to Dennery, that's what we're talking about. How can we now deal with that in terms of the age of austerity? All of those prescriptions and recommendations, all of those ideologies, and so on that we're talking about that have come to the fore, dealing with these issues, the point I want to make is that sometimes what appears good on paper detonates in practice. It explodes in practice. So it looks good on paper. You can work on it on paper, but it detonates in practice. Next one, please. So what are the challenges? So there are challenges to the well-being of many groups, communities, and individuals. We're not getting it right. We're not feeling well. Our organizations are crumbling. Our institutions are crumbling. We must be interested, therefore, in how Caribbean citizens sustain well-being in the face of all of those challenges? How do we sustain our well-being? Because the danger is, young citizens of the Caribbean, the danger is that we can undo all the gains we have made if we are not careful in terms of sustaining the well-being in the face of the challenges that we have now. We can undo all of those gains. So today, everything comes under the laws of competition. So there's what you call survival of the fittest. So people who are not fit are ignored. And I always talk about, for him, what you call the culture of waste. Even people are now being placed on the rubbish dump, on the waste dump. If you're not educated to a certain level, if you don't do certain things, if you're not part of the crowd in terms of the fashion and the consumerism and so on, if you can't make it, you're just ignored and left there. Can we continue our society like this? Or must there be a moral obligation to deal with those issues? The powerful feeding on the powerless. How do we continue that? The masses of people finding themselves excluded and marginalized. How can we deal with that? We find people without work, without possibilities, without a means of escape. So is there any wonder why we have had these problems across the region? We talk about the crime, the violence, the suicides. Is there any wonder why these things are happening? Is there any wonder why these things are happening in the face of a lack of connection? We come to a forum to speak. Instead of people getting acquainted and talking to each other, they're on their iPhones, texting, or on Facebook, or doing whatever. I tested it at the airport when I was coming in. 3 comrades of mine, we stood in a corner talking, and I said to them, I want you to look at the airport. I want you to look at the departure lounge. Every single person was on their iPhone. No connection. Who had their earphones on because we don't want to hear what you have to say. And very superficial. Good day, how are you? But do they really mean have a good day? It's just being said. It's automatic to say good morning, how are you? But there's no connection. There's no deep connection. That is where our society is beginning to fail. That is what our leaders have to preside over. So you have what I call, in all of this, the all-pervasive cult of mediocrity. So what we are saying now, you may not be able to see this, set the bar low enough and everyone is exceptional. We have a lowering of the bar now. We keep lowering the bar to accommodate. Set the bar low enough and everyone is exceptional. How can we continue in that vein? How can we really continue in that vein? So, what are the political implications? People generally like to think of themselves as governed less by others and more than by themselves. So everybody feels now, I don't need this, I don't need this person, I don't need this organization, I don't need this institution, I can get it done by myself. I can go on Google and find out the information. So maybe I don't even need to go to school, because I can simply go on the computer, on the internet and find the information. So why should I sit down for the teacher or anybody to tell me anything when I can go and find it by myself? The question is, don't you have to learn the skills? Don't you have to have certain skills to interpret what you see? To be able to discern what is right from wrong and what is important from what is nonsense. Don't you have to have what you call critical skills, skills of analysis, critical reasoning skills, so that what you read, you can begin to process and question. I always say the best way for our students in the school, and I like to address the young people on this, is that we must challenge whatever material that we read or we encounter. We must have a kind of ragamuffin approach where we do not accept what people say or what people do. Don't accept what I'm saying tonight either. Challenge it. Challenge it. Question it. That is how we have to begin to move. by taking the initiative, by looking at the critical reasoning skills that we need. And because of this, we are saying it's fueling declining levels of trust in public authorities. That is the political implication of all of that. I say to all of my friends that we now have a deficit in trust. Police power trust, moon power trust police, moon power trust avocat, sorry judge. Avocat power trust magistrate power trust judge. Parents not trusting children, children not trusting their parents. The congregation not trusting the priest or the pastor. That is the kind of thing we have now, a deficit in trust. People have lost trust. Trust in their leaders, whether it is the church, whether it is an institution, whether it's the community, we have a deficit on trust, and we have to bring back the trust that is necessary, because we have a situation where something is fueling the declining levels of trust we have in public authorities. We have to bring that back. Question is, how do we bring that back? So those suffering from rising levels of inequality are more prone to distrust their leaders and also doubt their capacities, doubt the capacities of our leaders to influence change. Can anybody tell me, how do we bring back trust into the countries across the Caribbean region? I do not even think that the Caribbean leaders in CARICOM trust each other. If they trusted each other, Liat would have been fixed a long time ago. It's the element of trust. So somebody now it is being suggested now that some prime minister is engaging in treason because that prime minister has made a statement about pulling out of Liat and having his own aircraft to begin to move in a certain direction. People are crying treason, traitor. So where's the trust? If at the top, trust is not being perpetuated or generated, then how can the people below feel a certain sense of trust? If there are some things that affect us that are not being done in a particular way, then how can we continue to trust? That is the point we have to make. What is the result? A self-perpetuating cycle set in motion, because what we have now is declining levels of civic engagement. Because we have declining levels of civic engagement, we have seen a reduction in electoral pressure on government to redistribute resources. People are copping out. As I go across the region, I just came from St. Kitts. The vibe you're getting across the region is that whenever you have elections and you have new governments coming in, what you have is not change, but an exchange. That is how people feel. That's the deficit that we now face in terms of political leadership. People believe it's just an exchange. It's not change. How can we deal with that? We can deal with that when young people begin to prepare. You don't just jump in. You begin to prepare. And I will tell you a little later how to begin to prepare. So it's a complex dynamic in which economic and political developments interact with shifting views of cultural membership and community. Now people don't even feel part of the community. You have to force people to do certain things. Are we politicians at fault? Because once a politician, always a politician. I consider myself a politician because once a politician, always a politician. Have we perpetuated a particular situation where somebody puts the flag on the poles and we pay them? Somebody does a little thing in the community and we have to pay them. Have we perpetuated that? Have we perpetuated the scenario of everything now is a contract? Everybody now is a contractor. Over the the last 10 years, people have automatically become contractors. It comes down again to the me business. So yesterday I'm walking through town, leisurely enjoying myself, and people come up to me and tell me that someone better like contract, like, what did you contract? A contract, but you know, we have to begin serious. We have to begin to get serious across the region. We have to begin to tell people like it is and stop pandering. Because we have to begin now to make sure that we put the country first. Yes, there are things that people will not like us to say. They will be hurt. They will jump high. They will jump low. It has to be said. It has to be done. Say it and do it. That is the point. Because in the end, it is the country we have to be thinking of and not simple things for political expediency. So the distrust is coming, and I mentioned that before, because people are now more frugal with the truth, but more liberal with deception. I am not saying it's an easy task to be a political leader or political leaders across the region or in our communities. It's not easy. But I think that there's some things we need to start thinking of and to do it right. So, with the political leadership in the Caribbean, how many of you want to be involved in the leadership of your communities in the not too distant future? Let me take this side of the house this time. Yes! Very nice. And what would you like to do, miss? Parliamentary representative, give her a round of applause, please. I am recruiting soldiers for the political army of the Caribbean's future. Anybody else? How are you going to prepare, my sister? How are you going to prepare? Think about it. Anybody on this side of the house? Any aspirations here to become a leader of anything at all? What about you, young lady?
Oh, I said no to political leader. Based on what's happening, I don't think I need to be involved in the political life.
Very nice. Okay, so what would you like to see change?
I think there should be more accountability. I think that there's a culture that we do things for people and people get paid, and I just don't support the culture, what politicians have turned St.Lucia into.
But you can always stop it yourself.
No, but it's a culture already, and it takes a lot to break it, and those persons, that's the way they're going. And
I like that. Keep on going, my sister, keep on going. How can we break that cult or that culture? What would you recommend for us to break that cult or that culture?
Like you were saying, we need to nurture your leaders. I think it needs to
Right.
start really early. So, for example, let's start as early as the primary schools.
Right.
Clubs, nurture them, show them the right things to do. Because we have so many models, those political models that we have out
Right.
there. So this is what they see.
Right. So we begin to nurture. Anybody else? Can I hear from a young man? Can I hear from a young man? I heard from a young lady, and everybody, could you give her a round of applause, please? I thought that was very good. Can I hear from a young man? This is our show, guys. We are the ones, you are the ones who need to know what is going to happen. You are the ones who have to be involved. Let's get you involved from early. Yes.
Hold on, he wanted to say.
I aspire to become more involved in community activities.
Right.
And my problem is that I see an inequity in opportunities being provided to the youth in terms of career advancement. And when you look at, for example, people who want to further their education, and just generally people who can, they have the capability, but they don't have the opportunity. So when that changes, again, that is why we have a lot of brain drain, a lot of people going outside of St.Lucia, because the opportunity simply isn't there. And even when they get it, they don't even think of going back.
Thank you very much. I have one question for you, though, just to follow. Do you have any ideas as to how we can, in fact, ensure that there is greater opportunity for you? What would you like? Because you know what you want. You are the leader of today, not tomorrow. What would you do to ensure that those opportunities are offered?
Assist in providing more avenues so that people get skilled and people generally develop their... People just get more opportunities to contribute and to become educated. So people get more educational opportunities, people get more opportunities to learn skills. So that is one way we can really spark some change.
Thank you very much. Can you give the brother a round of applause, please? Anybody else? Somebody at the back there must have something to say. Yes, talk to me.
Good evening, everyone. Actually, I am involved because I believe that the issues that are confronting our communities are quite pressing, and the whole notion of waiting back to see what opportunities present itself for you to get involved, I believe that leadership has to look at how can you create an avenue for you yourself to make a contribution. Because if you don't do so, the concerns will continue to exist. And it's a matter of stop misusing responsibility and accepting responsibility for the betterment of us all. Because whatever is wrong in the community will have implications for you. And we just need to broaden our thinking to understand the interconnectivity that exists among us all in the community. So the thing is that young people really have to get involved, be a part of it. And as you start doing that, you get better at it. It's a learning process, that's how I say it.
Very good. Now, do you see any barriers to involvement? What are the barriers to involvement?
Well, there are a number of barriers. On a personal side of things, you could look at psychological issues in terms of people not having the self-efficacy or the self-confidence to believing that they could make a difference. Right. So I think that fundamentally the mindset of that individual must change. Our value system is misplaced in terms of we believe in the individuality of life. We would not see that, okay, there's a problem with our value system, let's come together and fix it. So these are some barriers. But then going away from that, on a macro level, I think most youth groups suffer from a lack of funding. So these are some systemic barriers. Also, there will not be support in terms of cultural acceptance of the ideas that you want to bring to fruition. And you may find that you may have to go against that. So there are barriers to it, financials, other systematic barriers, and also personal. Yeah.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for the young man. This is what we want to see. Young people speaking out about certain things so that they can get involved. So what we see basically is a search for political leadership is critical at this time across the region to deal with the current challenges. The challenges of the impact of globalization and the neoliberal ideology. One of the things we're seeing happening is that with every new promise of change, we have seen hopes dashed to pieces on the shores of frustration and despair. But I wanted to focus on this here. This is what I believe we must look at. Great leaders don't set out to be leaders or to be a leader. They set out to make a difference. It's not about the role. It's always about the goal. So your idea is not to become them pontificate or say I'm the leader, I'm the great one, I have all the answers. The idea is what goal have you set? So those of you in the audience who are thinking of leadership, politically or otherwise, let's set our sights not on the role, but the goal. And not only that, let us also set our sights on preparation. I believe part of our difficulty across the region is that we are not preparing ourselves for leadership. We believe we can just walk on the stage, take a mic and begin to talk and walk into a place and begin to make changes, but we need to make the requisite preparation. So, what we see in our environment now is a sense of powerlessness. That powerlessness has replaced a sense of possibility that came with independence. And Dr. Tennyson Joseph would agree with this point. So, we have great excitement in terms of the of independence. At least certain sections of the population had great excitement. We saw opportunities to move in a certain direction. The question is, how far have we gone? And are we satisfied with how far we have gone? Have we ignored the importance of political leadership? Have we? Have we ignored the importance of political leadership? Have we taken that for granted? In this new dispensation, can people be led in the same way? Do you think we can continue leading people in the same way that we did before? I don't think so. Not in this complex environment. Not in this .com Google era. I think we have to change the game. What we need now across the region are game changers to make a game change. And that is where our young people must begin to make the preparation. Political parties and trade unions, I ask the question all the time. Are they an endangered species in this current period? And that is where I want to spend a little time. How much time do I have, my brother? Okay. And that is where I want to spend a little time. Are our political parties endangered species across the region? I want to hear from our young people and from the general audience. Are we doing what we have to do? Are our political parties endangered species? Furia, good night.
Almost, but not quite.
Explain, please.
Almost, because the political parties, if you look at them well and you study them, on the whole, to me, they aim for the same things, but in different ways. And yet, they continue to fight against each other. In fact, I am yet to see a political party praising another political party for something that is done right.
That's not the nature of the game, right?
It's not the nature of the game at all.
Right.
And in doing this, we alienate people. We alienate them. Right. We should be honest enough to say, Damian Graves, during his time as minister, did such and such a thing which was good and is still good.
Right.
But we go on blaming. There is a blame game going on. When will it stop? I do not know.
It will stop when our younger people start to come into the politics and change the game.
Now the unions, the trade unions, some of them seem to be dividing more than uniting people. Again, I believe it is this sense of power that the leaders think they have,
right,
that I alone can do, and nobody else can do it as well as I can. Right. Now, until we change that, I believe our trade unions are going to fail.
Okay, thank you very much. Round of applause for the lady, please. Words of wisdom. Can I hear from other people? Do you think our political parties are an endangered species? Are we passing on the history of our political parties? How many of our people know about the work of George Charles and Olio Jean-Baptiste and all of those stalwarts of long ago? How many people know about them? How many people know about the labor struggles of St. Lucia? To be able to understand the environment in which the political party developed and whether it's keeping along those ideals. How much nurturing is going on in political parties? How much nurturing? How much of a ground is there for people who are supposed to be thrusted in certain positions? How much succession planning is there in the political parties across the region? All of the political parties seem to be going through that particular route. We wait until the end, and then we have mayhem as to who is going to take over in a particular political entity. And we're not learning from the mistakes of others. So political parties and trade unions, I think, are in some spot of difficulty across the region. The political parties and trade unions may not be inspiring our young people to participate and to be involved. And they need to be involved in political parties beyond forming youth groups or youth arms. After they have formed the youth group and the youth arms, there should be some deliberate and conscious attempt to get them to be involved. It must not be token involvement or participation. It cannot be token involvement and participation. At campaign time, they're involved and they give you good numbers on the campaign trail that could sway undecided voters. And then after that, you don't know what is going on. Yes, we have the NYC. Yes, you assist with sports and all of those things across the region. But how many political parties consciously and deliberately take young talent under their wings to begin to prepare for the future? That is the deficit we are facing now. That is the challenge that we are facing right now. So what do political leaders require in this environment that we have been discussing? The first thing I want us to agree on, and I'm not brainwashing you or thrusting things down your throat, the first thing I think we must agree on is that politics must not be merely seen as a means of gaining personal status. Politics must not be seen as a means of gaining power, of gaining privilege, of gaining control. Leaders, we have to begin to see politics as a vocation rather than a profession. That's why there must be term limits. 10 years and no more across the region. So you don't come and tell and come there and you think that you have to be there ad infinitum. Look at what happened in St. Kitts. Trying to hold on to power. Look at the problems that obtained. Let us have the transition. If you know you have a term limit of 10 years, you will be forced to nurture talent. If you don't know, if you do not believe constitutionally or otherwise that you don't have term limits, then you will continue ad infinitum. We must stop that. That is why I'm disappointed that in St. Lucia today, we still do not have constitutional reform, which we started since 1997. Dame Susie has gone to the great beyond, and we still have not done anything with constitutional reform. We talk all the time about CCJ, and we still have not signed on to the CCJ. What is the problem? What is the problem? The ambivalence, the indecision. That is the trust. That is the difficulty we are having. So politics must not be merely seen as gaining personal status. And I want to quote the comrade Jose Marti of Cuba, a great writer, poet, and scholar. And I'm sure that Dr. Stanley will be very impressed with this. The person who thinks, and I quote, the person who thinks of himself does not love his country. And the ills of nations reside, however subtly they may at times be disguised, in the barriers of hasty actions with which self-interest of their representatives regard or accelerate the natural course of events. If you love yourself, and it is only the fact that you think of yourself and yourself alone, then how can you think of the country? Term limits are important. In Grenada today, they're discussing that constitutional reform will be voted on in Grenada sometime in August, July to August. They postponed it from January this year because there were still issues. They're looking at 15 years. I've been arguing that it should be 10 years. You don't even know 15 years. You need 10 years and go and let somebody else take over. So because, and you know what people use? People use this thing. People use this excuse. But boy, we don't have people who are well educated. Our human resources are finite. Bosi muna mo. Bosi muna tombe maladi. Resources are finite. Let's have faith in the process. If we begin to nurture, resources will not be finite. We must begin to nurture. But you have your 10 years and you walk out and say, thank you very much. You have done what you did. Maybe there's a possibility in the Constitution that you can come back after a while. But serve your 10 years and bye-bye. Obama will do it. In November, come November next year, Obama will say bye-bye. Bush said bye-bye 2 terms ago. You understand what I'm saying? People can begin to say bye-bye. Next one. So what do political leaders require in this environment? Need for leadership that is transformational and change agent in character. You want to transform. You want to be a game changer. You want to improve things for people. We need leaders who are not afraid of struggle, who will always seek dialogue, engagement, creative management, and the resolution of conflict. Not just management, but as my good friend Comrade Joe would say, we need creative management. In other words, folks, we need to start thinking out of the box and stop filling the box. We have been filling the box. Let's think outside of the box. Our leaders in the region are beginning to act like people who have gone to a bar and who got drunk and their keys have been lost and they're searching under the lamppost. And when you ask them, why are you searching under the lamppost? But that's where the light is. Step out of the light into the shadows and begin to think out of the box and stop filling the box. That's the point that I'm making. And that's the challenge I'm placing before them. That's what I'm suggesting. So the need for leadership must be there. We need leaders who are not afraid of struggle. And the final point I want to make in regard to this slide is that too many of our leaders spend too little time preparing themselves for the task of real change. So if you young people tonight, like my good friend Emran from Denver North, my very good friend, he made sure, give him a round of applause please, because he came all the way from there to ensure that he's here tonight. My friend, if you want to be there, if you want to be part of this, then you must begin to prepare yourself for the task of real change. And we'll see what is required. Next slide. What do political leaders require in this environment? New influence-based rather than authority-driven leadership. Again, when I discussed that with my comrade, he said, there's too much of this messianic, populist kind of thing. This is a new environment. You do not need the populist right now, the messianic leader, the one who has come to save the world. That's not what we need now. We need somebody who can influence. The sister said it. Give her a round of applause again. Influence-based leadership rather than authority-driven leadership. I would not say that we may not need a little benign dictatorship, a little benevolent dictatorship every now and then to make sure that we get things moving. But largely, we are talking about the new influence-based leadership. We are talking about political competence, which includes one's ability to analyze and understand one's own environment. I have a confession to make. I like to be anecdotal in my discussions. When I won the election in 1997, Pamela Camisola is not a Kwaban Mutini. Mate paper with Pisa. No, we had a passion. We did have a passion to enter into the politics. All of a sudden, Dr. Kenny Anthony calls me and says, we want you to become Minister of Community Development and Culture, so you need to be sworn in this afternoon. Matini Pualeko Junction, a jacket and tie, query. Because I didn't have. Was I prepared? I was not prepared. Then I arrived in the ministry and I sat down in the chair, props. And the first thing that came to mind, okay, so what do I do now? What does it signal? Lack of preparation. And that's what political parties must do. Prepare you for those kinds of things. So it is the permanent secretary who had to take me through the ropes and make me understand that you must do this and you must do that and this is what is involved and so on. If you want to enter the fray, you must prepare yourselves from now. What is parliamentary procedure? How do you conduct your ministerial affairs? What do you do? And not only that, you must understand what's happening in the world environment. Because we are not alone. What we do affects people, what people do affects us. We must understand what is happening in terms of England, of the USA, of Asia, what is happening between Russia and the United States of America. We must understand diplomacy. We need to begin to take those issues on board. It's not simply going on the campaign trail, becoming a parliamentary representative, sitting in a ministry and not doing the requisite reading to understand and taking advice. Too many of us are not prepared for the position. We have to insist that our political parties, part of what they need to do across the region is to prepare people for those positions. We can no longer, folks, leave it to chance. We cannot leave it to chance. This world is too complex to leave it to chance.
Question to the back.
Yes.
You mentioned about not leaving things to chance, right?
Yes.
And being prepared. Everybody can hear me.
Yes.
And being prepared for political life, right? As young leaders. And you spoke about you being caught off guard somewhat and that you had to run here and run there. Apart from just having an idea as to what's happening around you in terms of what's happening in England,
yes,
what's happening in Afghanistan,
right,
Grenada, and having a decent suit,
yes,
where my question is, what do you think is essential for a young person like myself who may be interested in entering the political realm? Because most of them see our ministers, our parliamentarians, they won election, but the basic academics, some of them hardly have a high school certificate, but they're like you're sitting in a chair, you're leading a ministry, and you don't understand basic stuff. So what do you think? Paint us like three essential things that you think we as young persons who may aspire to political life need.
Thank you. Can you give a round of applause for that very good question? And that's what we're coming to now. My sister, we need more than technical competence and professional competence. So you may even have a degree. You may have a master's. That's not what I'm talking about. That technical and professional competence is important. But it is, though necessary, it is insufficient to deal with the challenging and complex situations today. That's what we are saying. The fact that you have a PhD does not mean that you are naturally a good leader. Not at all. Not at all. There's a need of the use of what I call creative power. Because you have power in your hands. Can you imagine? My sister, are you listening to me? Okay. Can you imagine you have power in your hands? You have not had that power before. And you have it now. And you cannot use it intelligently because you have not been prepared. That's what we're talking about. Need for the use of creative power, not destructive or manipulative power, but more importantly, the need for informed risk-taking and power sharing. Informed risk-taking. Too many of us are risk-averse. We have to take our chances. Yes, sir.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
I think that last one touched a nerve in me. As we go through the Caribbean and St. Lucia on a whole, there has been, or there is a problem in leadership as far as the political parties are concerned. And I say this without any fear of contradiction. And we're looking at home. We had the entire of Sir John Compton. When he left the arena, there was decimation with that party. And up to now, it has not come through. And for some reason, I think there is a consensus among some St. Lucians that once you have a little queer you should be Prime Minister. And now I am asking tonight, and as you do this lecture, comrade, what is it in place for that not to reoccur in St. Lucia? Because we have had a sitting Prime Minister for 3 terms. And I believe, I say it without any fear of contradiction, that they may found themselves flat hands if something emanates. So what they are doing now for preparation of the next political league.
First of all, I believe that everybody must have an equal opportunity to political leadership, Kuye, YII or not. That's my personal view. The color of a man's skin should not determine his leadership capability. That is discrimination. I will not follow that, and I do not agree with that. I believe it has to be on merit. And I believe the preparation has to be one whereby you try to understand your environment. Gregor, it is important. Young people across the region, it is important that you understand your environment. The national environment, the regional environment, the international environment. It is important that we understand those issues. And moreover, if you're a minister for health or minister for education, it does not mean that you shouldn't be reading and understanding other issues outside of your ministry. Because other issues outside of your ministry impacts the ministry of which you have had the good fortune to be managing. Now, I've been given a time limit, so let me go quickly. So what do political leaders require in this environment? The processing of information and the mastery of the art of effective communication. I want to acknowledge my good comrade Ignatius Jean for this very important point. The mastery of the art of effective communication, both verbally and in writing. You have to be able to communicate so that people can understand you. Initiative, collaboration, negotiation, networking skills. This is the toolkit. These form part of the toolkit of the leader of today and tomorrow. Resourceful diplomacy. Not just diplomacy, but resourceful diplomacy. Imaginative vision. Not just vision, imaginative vision and creative management. These are the skills that must come to the fore. Comrade, change my slide for me, please. Right. These are the skills that must come to the fore. So what is the toolkit needed? I'm ending up now. This is what a student said, Kevin Wong, a liberal arts student of Princeton University. What a beautiful piece. Here's what he says. In an innovation economy, which is like ours, we will need dreamers. We will need inventors. We will need scholars to lead our nation forward, to lead our region forward. People who can think unconventionally across disciplines and beyond a single skill set. I thank you.
Very inspiring you to dream. We are way past our time, but we shall take some questions. 5 questions.
Any amount. I'm here all night, but I will go by what Mr. George says. Mr. Shalman.
Yes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Dr. Grace. First of all, I need to compliment you on an excellent presentation. I have 3 questions for you. They're very short, people.
No problem.
Many St. Lucians are asking for an end to partisan politics. What is your view? What are your views on that? Secondly, recently I heard Dr. Tennyson Joseph. He said that the way forward for the Caribbean is going back to federation. Do you think that the kinds of leaders that we have around the Caribbean, do you think that this is going to be successful, having federation right now? And thirdly, don't you think that leadership is based on your environment? So, for example, persons might have a problem with Cuba being communist. Don't you think that you have to really assess your environment to know what type of leadership fits your environment?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I like those 3 questions. Give her a round of applause, please. I have been saying all night that you need to understand your environment. For you to be a good leader, you have to understand your environment. And your environment is wide. Your environment is not simply the community of which you form a part. It's not simply the nation where you were born. It goes beyond to the region. And it goes even beyond that to the international scenario. That is the environment that we need to understand. Because when we go to those international fora, we must go there knowing more than the people who we are dealing with. In times past, what happened? You would go to those fora and these people give you more information than you would have on your own country. That is why we need some what you call resourceful diplomacy. Do the research. We do not document. We don't do the research. We do not have what you call evidence-based leadership and management. We're still very much anecdotal in our orientation. We need to get it right. Because this is an age of science and technology, my sister. It's an age of science and technology. It's an age of information. We must have the information for good and effective and efficient decision making. That's one.
Back to federation.
The second question about federation, I do not know if we want to go back to federation. I understand what he's saying because I read his document and I think it's a good idea. What he's saying is that the second independent struggle has to be one whereby we really sink our teeth into regionalism. And I believe that is where we need to go. But you ask a very important question. Do the powers that be across the region trust each other? The answer is no. The answer is no. But you know another thing too? All of us have self-interest. The self-interest that we have must be invested also in the cooperation that we need. So all of us have economic difficulties. All of us have difficulties in terms of aviation. All of us have difficulties in terms of health. My interest is to get there. Dominica's interest is to get there. Sometimes we need to compromise our self-interest for the larger good or for the greater good of the region. That's why Sir Sridhar Rampal said in a speech, an address 5 years ago to the Grenada Bar Association, where he said the problem with the region is narcissistic insularity. That is part of our difficulty. And the first question you asked was something to do with what again? The first question?
Partisanship.
Partisanship? That is where you must come in, my sister. As I said to you, people like myself, I wouldn't say my good friend Mr. Ignatius Jean, but people like myself, I have more years behind me than ahead of me. It must now be you. It must not be you in the future, it must be you now. Now you must begin to think with your college. This is the conversation you must have in Labrie and Swazel, the conversation you must have in the nation about once and for all, what is it we are going to do to end the divide? So if somebody does something good in one party, why destroy it if another party comes when there can be continuity? Because in the end, it is for the greater good of the country and not just for the political expediency of the party. That's what we have to focus on.
All right, next question. Do you believe that
Yes.
Do you believe that the heavily Eurocentric and the colonial basis that this country and a lot of countries in our region was founded upon needs to be, which were implemented not for our gain, which most of our laws and our society at large were founded on, needs to be revamped and even changed to a large extent. What do you think about that?
Absolutely, because the ghost of colonialism still haunts us. Do you know that we still have things there? We have invested in things that still can be traced to the Moyen Commission since 1938. I could take some time to do that. We can talk about it privately because I would have to go on and on about that. The point is the ghost continues to haunt us. And the anti-colonial struggles have continued with other faces in the international scenario. So our job is not done. Our job will never be done. We have to deal with that. Yes, the ghost continues to haunt us, and yes, we have to exorcise that ghost.
Yes, Kendall Elmo, before no.
Yes, good evening once again.
I'm hearing, but I'm not seeing. Okay, thank you, sir. I like to hear and see.
Okay, that's good, sir. Good evening once again, everyone. You spoke quite a bit about the capitalist system and neoliberalism ideologies. And the point I was getting from you was that you are not so much in agreement with a system of this nature, especially to the extent that you establish that the whole concept of inclusive capitalism is almost a misnomer. Maybe you said it's a misnomer.
Yes, it's a misnomer.
Then, what I want to ask you is that there is the school of thought that within a system like that where market forces are controlling the arrangement of our labor relations and other aspects of society, that it may be a benefit because it makes use of natural motivation that exists among the human population. And if you have a system which does not capitalize on that, then you may not exploit the most that you want to get from human society. So what I want to ask you is that in light of your disagreements with many of the attributes of the capitalist system, what system are you proposing? I'm not necessarily saying that it's a black and white issue where you tell me socialist or some other system, but I really want to know, because when I look at the evolution of society, isn't it to an extent that the capitalist system that we have at this point, isn't it a consequence of social evolution? Because there appear to be, if you look at human history, a whole change that has occurred from very basic societies to what we have presently. So to what extent do you believe that we shall still see that sort of change happening in terms of our social arrangements? And what system are you proposing to help us deal with our present situation?
I always like to get away from isms and systems. What I would like to see, whatever society we have, and we evolve, that there is a system, that there is a situation of social justice. I believe in whatever system there is, there has to be some level of social justice. And what I am concerned about is the rolling back of the involvement of the state in terms of its distributive and redistributive power. That's what I'm talking about. I am worried about the future if the state continues to be seen as an entity that is obsolete by the neoliberal ideology. What has saved us in the Caribbean has been the role of the state in ensuring that we are provided with education, with health, and things of that nature. The path I see that we are drifting towards is a path whereby people are suggesting, really, the state has no place. All the state has to do now is to ensure that the economy is managed properly. That you get a few technicians who understand how to manage the economy, and that's it. It's more than that. Our state has been our saving grace, and we should keep the state involved in terms of its redistributive role for the benefit of the masses of the people who always get left behind, even in the misnomer of inclusive capitalism. That's how I see it.
My question is in terms of finance. Apparently, the Caribbean countries, we are faced with very, very high debt, and as a result, our government seems to be very confused as to how to get out of it. So, just your opinion on how we got there, and any suggestions on our way out of high debt.
Well, how we got there, although that's beyond the scope of our discussion, but how we got there is very easy to understand. How we got there is some of the things that we have engaged in, and of course, apart from the things that we have engaged in terms of the spending, we have also had to contend with the international scenario out there. The IMF, the Bretton Woods institutions, that is, of the IMF and the World Bank and certain other countries and so on. So we are like Wavet devant poule. Wavet devant poule, because we are definitely in some instances powerless. And that's why Dr. Tennyson Joseph's point is so important. If we come together as the 15 nations of CARICOM and we look together at one particular strategy and move in one direction, I think we would have more power in that respect. We'd be more respected. What is happening now is that people can play one against the other. I remember in my other life as Minister for Health, we went to a WHO meeting, a PAHO meeting, a Pan-American Health Organization meeting. The 15 ministers of health of CARICOM were in caucus, and the meeting could not start. The Pan-American Health Organization meeting could not start because the meeting was not quorate. And we put our position forward on the whole business of pharmaceuticals for HIV/AIDS, and we were respected in that light. That gave me a good idea that if we really can keep together, we can get things going. So I agree with Dr. Tennyson Joseph that the second independence revolution must of necessity look at regionalization, the regional system, regionalism. That's what we need to look at. And that is part of the way in which we can get out of the debt situation, and part of the way in which we can ensure that we keep to a certain level. I also believe it is important to involve the social partners in what we are doing now. I believe for too long, as governments, we believe we have the answers. But we must have the watchdogs. And the watchdogs must be civil society. Civil society must be able to tell us some grouping, some commission, some civil society grouping comprising various stakeholders should be able to hold the government to account on behalf of the citizens as to what we spend, how we spend, and how we produce that debt. I think that is important. In Grenada, Dr. Keith Mitchell has brought the social partners together. And now that they have gone into an IMF program, a 3-year IMF program, which they have called homegrown, but is IMF nonetheless, the social partners meet every month to see where we are at, how we are doing. Now, it may be token, but at least they have an opportunity to see what is going on, to look at the books, to make intelligent suggestions, and to be able to put the government sort of on a path where they do not basically abuse the power that they have. So I think these are some of the things that we need to do. Consensus, speaking to people, getting people involved. We do not have all the answers because we have won the election. There must be consensus. Let us go out and speak to people, get the ideas of people, get them involved. We are not imbued with all of the answers. This political leadership is not a one-man show. It has to be a team effort among people to arrive at a particular place where we want to see our societies across the region. That's how I see it.
Final thoughts?
Yes, sir.
Final thoughts from you as we close for the evening?
My final thoughts would be very simple. I think at this stage of our development, the region needs a certain boldness. Political leaders and political leadership needs a certain boldness that is tempered with gentleness and compassion. It needs courage that has to take into account as well, or has to be balanced by humility. It needs, the leadership across the region needs to be shaped in such a way that people understand that the leaders have empathy. There's a need for empathy as well. There's a need for people to understand that we have to move the region and move our young people from the present circumstances that they face in terms of the destitution I see taking place, and very importantly, what I refer to as consuming complacency. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Dr. Damian Eisenhower Graves, to officially thank all those who made this possible. I'd like to call on the President of the Choiseul Youth and Sports Council, Ms. Jenny Kaya.
Good evening. It is good to give thanks. My task tonight is to mention and to acknowledge the contribution of persons who made this program a success tonight. Thank you to the Wayne Memorial Foundation and the NYC, Mr. Damian Graves for a thought-provoking and exciting delivery. The Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, Mr. Jim Xavier, Director of Youth and Sports. The Principal of the PI Secondary School, Ms. Faye Wilson. Larry Stilpan, Mr. Christo Williams, Mr. Cyril Saltibus, Ms. Valeriana St. Helen, District Youth and Sports Council, the Executive of the Choiseul Youth and Sports Council, Mr. Makaka Philip, Tradition OPI, and to you, the audience, for being very patient. Thank you very much.